What's up, horror fans? Anchor Pete here for another episode of the Lassercast. And we are celebrating Stephen King month for the month of November. For the first time tonight, Danny, Chris, and I are talking about a book together. And I think that Danny and Chris picked a really good one for tonight's episode. The book that these gentlemen have picked for tonight is Stephen King's Revival, which came out in 2014. And it is just Stephen King's 65th novel that he's written. So, yeah, he's written a couple. I figure we kind of talk about it in general terms and then get right to spoilers after that.
Yeah, there has to be a part of the video where we talk spoilers because the ending of this book is something. And it needs to be discussed, analyzed, and also if and when this is turned into a movie, I cannot wait to see what that looks like. So there will be a spoiler part of the video. There has to be.
Yeah.
So, if you guys want, I can do a little summary of it real quick. I just finished the book about 2 hours ago. So for the book, Revival, it follows the life of Jamie Morton. And he starts off as a kid in Maine with his family. He has a whole bunch of siblings, and we learn about his siblings, we learn about his parents, we learn about his town. And in his town comes a minister, which is Charles Daniel Jacobs, okay? Right off the bat, this isn't a spoiler, right in the very beginning of the book, Jamie alludes to the fact that Charles Daniel Jacobs might be the most evil man that he's ever met in his life. And at first, it doesn't seem that way. Over the course of the book, we see their relationship develop. It starts off with Jamie's childhood, and we watch him progress from a child to a teenager to an adult, and eventually he hits middle age. And over the course of time, he has these interactions with Charles Daniel Jacobs. And so we see both of them metamorphosize over the course of decades, into these different characters. And it wouldn't be Stephen King without some kind of twisted supernatural shit. So we will discuss that more in spoilers.
It's funny, because it's a good chunk of the book before you're really just following Jamie's life. I'm going to say the first half, things happen during that time, but you're really just following Jamie's life. And I was enjoying it, but at the same time, asking myself if I was enjoying it because it's not what I expected. Mm-hmm. And I had this sort of war with myself. Like, are you sure you're enjoying this? And I'm like, yes, I'm enjoying it. Stop asking, self. Like, I really was. I'm like, I expected something completely different, but I'm enjoying the hell out of this. And that's a testament to King. That's a testament to Mike Flanagan, who is the whole reason we're here and will eventually adapt this. And we're all very excited about it. That you read something, you watch something, and after a while you're like, this is so good. I don't even care when the scares show up, if they show up.
I love the book. And for me, when I first got into reading horror, my two biggest favorites were King, obviously. King was like my gateway drug into horror, but also Clive Barker. And I always compared them by saying Clive Barker's the better writer, but Stephen King is the better storyteller. Huh. And so it didn't bother me that for long chunks of the book, it kind of felt like nothing was really happening because I was totally engrossed in these characters. And there are many characters, but it's really a two-person book. It's Jamie Morton and his fifth business, as he calls him, Reverend Jacobs. And you grow with these characters, and they grow. Like, you meet Jamie as a 7 or 8 year old, like I think a 6-year-old even, and he meets Reverend Jacobs as like a guy in his early 20s. The terrible sermon, which we'll get to, happens when he's 9, and then the book ends, and the major incident takes place, and he says in the last chapter, I'm 61 now, which means it happened 3 years ago when he was 58. And Reverend Jacobs is a literal senior citizen, like, who can barely walk.
Yeah.
So you are following these characters on a long journey. And I was engrossed in these two characters. And I think the book has so much, and again, this goes back to a conversation we've had before. what is horror? We talked about this with Haunting of Bly Manor. What is horror? Horror, Pete, you and I, we have children, we have young kids. Horror is losing your family. And that's in this book.
Oh, yeah.
Horror is getting into a life-altering car wreck and becoming a drug addict because of it. That's in this book.
Yeah.
Horror is losing faith in everything that you believed in, everything that you held holy, losing that faith. That's horror. So for me, yes, there are obviously, when you read a Stephen King, you're expecting some crazy stuff and some supernatural elements and this stuff, and it pays off. But along the way, I never doubted that this was just a great story of these two characters and the stuff that they're going through, both as antagonists and as kind of compatriots for a while.
Yeah.
So I was really into this book from the beginning. This was one of my favorite modern King books.
Chris, you bring up this great point, and Danny, you did as well. Like, Chris, you were saying that you were kind of having this struggle. Am I enjoying this book? Am I not? And I felt that way, especially when Jamie's talking about his childhood and he's talking about his childhood experiences. I know that, like, I'm supposed to listen to that, eat that up, because what King does so well is he's able to capture the feeling of everyday life, and it's exciting. It's kind of like what you were just saying, Danny, right? Which is that like the real life stuff, the loss of, people in your life, the loss of loved ones, having accidents. Stephen King can make that just as scary as any kind of Lovecraft-inspired thing, right? And he talks about cancer quite a bit in this book. He talks about addiction quite a bit in this book. And he describes horrific accidents. And in all of those cases, it makes my anxiety like super strong, to where I'm just like, I read about the cancer in the book and I'm saying, should I get screened? Like, this is probably how I'm going to die. And it's just, to me, it's so disturbing.
There's also domestic abuse. His sister is at the end, it ends up getting murdered by her abusive husband.
Yeah.
I just watched this afternoon, because we were getting together, I watched an interview that Stephen King did. I guess it was Good Morning America. It was with Matt Lauer. So it had to be a few years ago, because he's been canceled since then.
Right.
But he asked Stephen King about, what he thought of, does he fear death? Because it was about this book when it was coming out. And Stephen King said, I don't fear death, but I do fear things like cancer and this is really embarrassing. I forgot the name of the disease where you lose your memory.
Alzheimer's.
I forgot the name of Alzheimer's. There you go. That's real life horror right there.
Yes.
Yeah, like Stephen King said, he fears things like Alzheimer's and cancer, and you get that so much in this book, where he's like you said, Pete, he's detailing all of these terrible things that are real life things that happen to real people, good people, people of faith, and that you can't stop. They're just parts of life. And I just thought it was interesting listening to him say that in that interview, that those were the things that he fears more than death.
Yeah. So let me ask both of you guys too, while we're kind of in this realm of non-spoilers and we're talking about just the real life stuff and not the supernatural stuff, did you guys feel like Reverend Jacobs was a genuine good person to begin with, and that we literally watch him transform into an evil person? Or do you think that there was something sinister there in the beginning? What do you think, Chris?
I feel like he was, and I think they tried to place it really early on that this is a genuine good person who, has a little more than a hobby when it comes to his experiments right off the bat. He has a passion for them, and that's quickly erased. And it shows you that, anything's possible. The initial conversation between Jamie and Charles, their initial meeting. It tells you everything you need to know at the beginning. You know, that's the brilliance of King. You get everything you need to know about these characters at this point in their lives. And I do feel like Charles Jacobs was a good person, what he eventually becomes. And a side note, I mean, we won't get into spoilers yet, but I said to Danny when he was reading this, I'm like, I don't know if you watched Smallville, but man, the older version of Charles Jacobs, I couldn't picture anyone for Jamie. The older version of Charles Jacobs, all I pictured was Lionel Luthor. I pictured John Glover as Lionel Luthor, and I don't know why. Never locked in anyone for Jamie, but again, I digress. So yes, I do think Charles Jacobs was initially a good person who was just passionate, and then, you know, something happens and it turns his life upside down.
Yeah. Chris, you know, I'm so glad you brought that up too, because remind me, guys, at the end, I think that we should cast this movie for Flanagan when we're done with our discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Danny, what'd you think about Charles Jacobs?
Well, I mean, I think Flanagan's going to cast Kate Siegel as Reverend Charles Jacobs. So
oh, there you go. Right. That makes sense. Yes.
That makes, yeah. I mean,
I'm here for it.
Yeah, she'd be great. So here's the thing with Charles Jacobs. There's a discussion to be had on whether he ever does become a real villain. It's because even the things that he does that can be construed as villainous, which are villainous, there's a good side to them that, you know, obviously the effects of what he does lead to horrifying things. But there is an element, you know, of good to what he's doing throughout. So that's an interesting, you know, is he a villain? Is he a tragic hero? That's a whole other side conversation. I also got like whispers of the Killing Joke in this, where, you know, like one bad day is all you need.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not calling him the Joker, but there's that element of, you know, I do think he was a good person, but I do think that, you know, like Chris said, there's a side of him that's very inquisitive, and he was going to explore that side, ramifications and all, no matter what. Nothing was going to stop him from conducting his experiments. And to that point, his wife is actually supportive of him doing these things. Like, she helps at the beginning with some of his earlier experiments, and you kind of get the feeling that, you know, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, you know, his wife and child died tragically in an accident, because that's kind of the inciting incident.
Yeah.
But before, like, you kind of get the feeling that had they not died tragically, that they would have gone along for the ride with him, as supporting characters in his experiments throughout, with, you know, electricity and all of his lightning-based experiments. So, you know, there's kind of the mad scientist there. There's kind of a Victor Frankenstein aspect to him. There's also a kind of a Joker side to him, with the Killing Joke aspect. It's a really interesting question. We could do a whole video about Charles Jacobs. That's partly why I love the book so much. He is such a complex character.
Yeah.
To Jamie, you could tell, and if we were Jamie, then yeah, he's a villain first and foremost. You know, he is the Joker to Jamie's Batman.
Right.
But to the outside observer, there's a lot to unpack. So it's a very good question that, you know, we could spend more time on. But yeah.
Yeah.
I thought he was a good person at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because you just referenced Frankenstein. And when you just look up, you do a little simple research on the book, it says that Stephen King, first off, he had this story from when he was a kid. He had the idea for a revival from when he was a kid, and he just waited until now to basically publish it. And he talks about his influences for Revival. And for his influences, he mentions Arthur Machen's Great God Pan as one of the influences, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, obviously. Now, I can clearly see the Frankenstein influences. Do you guys know anything about this Great God Pan book at all?
No.
So here's the synopsis. You tell me if this sounds familiar. Ready? So here's the Great God Pan. The novella begins with an experiment to allow a woman named Mary to see the supernatural world. This is followed by an account of a series of mysterious happenings and deaths over many years surrounding a woman named Helen Vaughn. At the end, the heroes confront Helen and force her to kill herself. Does that sound like there's any kind of connections between
Yeah. Mary?
Because I think we really want to talk about the end of this book. And so I think that we can start shoving spoilers in there, and we can start, talking about what happens, right? So basically, the accident that you're referring to, the time when Jacobs loses his wife and kids, he's got a little toddler, and he has this beautiful wife, and everyone in the church loves both of them, right? They call his son Tag Along Maury because he's always playing with the kids in the church. Well, there's this horrible, horrible accident where they are killed because a guy, I think he's driving a tractor, and he crashes into them, and the son's face gets ripped off. It's like one of the worst things I've ever read. And the way that Stephen King makes that scene work so well is that we cut to Jamie as an adult, and his mom is dying of cancer. And she describes having to go tell Charles Daniel Jacobs how his family died. And she describes it vividly. And it's her experiencing his reaction, which makes it like 10 times more powerful than if the narrator had experienced it. It's a really great scene. I think it's like one of the highlights of the book. And I feel like that's when the book really shifts. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, it's really, I actually love a lot of the stuff with, that's one of my favorite moments. It's probably one of my most favorite moments early on, the mother having to go and tell Charles what happened. It's really where this book starts to pick up for me. I mean, I liked it from the get-go, but King's just graphic detail is, I mean, his detail with everything. There's, later on when we start talking about Jamie and Astrid's first sexual encounter, like it's just like, oh, King, like it's so detailed. These moments in this rural area, I got such It and Stand By Me moments of just all the young kids, Tag Along Maury, all these kids. I cannot wait to see Flanagan do that, like have his like Rob Reiner moment, like with just these kids in that time period. I'm so excited to see that.
Yeah.
You said, it's funny you brought up It, because I'm thinking now about how this is going to be a movie, and I'm thinking like maybe they need to do an It style thing where the first half is just, young Jamie and young Reverend Jacobs. And then the second part of the movie is is the adult, and then the slowly aging characters. Because it's going to be something, because it's also going to be really interesting to see Mike Flanagan with, the most in terms of special effects that we've seen him really work with, I guess, would be Dr. Sleep, which we're going to talk about. Yeah. But this is a whole other level of special effects.
Oh yeah.
That he's going to be working with. So we'll see.
Could you imagine if you were listening to our show and you haven't read this book and you're like, just get to the fucking ending? Like, I'm like, what is this ending about? I want to know. Like we are making this ending sound like incredible.
Well, the other thing is we just brought up Gerald's Game and how that was unfilmable, and the ending of this book does kind of feel like we talked about the ending of Gerald's Game and how, for you especially, Pete, like you said, it was so jarring and it came so out of nowhere that it kind of stuttered your love of the movie. You still love the movie, but it's just like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah.
I feel like for readers of this book, and also when that movie comes out, there's going to be a lot of people who feel exactly the same way, where they're going to be like, well, that was a really good movie, but then what the hell?
One crucial thing that we didn't mention is that one of Jamie's siblings, his name's Conrad, right? He calls him Con. He is in an accident where he has damage to his vocal cords, right? And so he isn't able to talk. And so we see that the stress that puts on his family, and it seems like this really, really horrible incident, right? Well, Charles Daniel Jacobs takes Conrad and does this experiment, and he's actually able, with the power of electricity, to make his vocal cords work once again. And Jamie is right there to witness this. So that's when we get the first taste of what this story is ultimately about. And that is connected to what you were talking about, Danny, with like all these various people that he heals. After this terrible sermon, which you can go into, Danny, Charles Daniel Jacobs leaves his parish and goes off into the world. We see him later on as a carnival worker, where he's able to do these crazy shows where he can like superimpose an image onto a person. And we learn over the course of the book that every little thing that he does where he's using electricity, sometimes it cures people, other times it does truly horrible things. And so Jamie learns about this, and he actually himself is experimented on by Jacobs. Jamie, over the course of his life, he's injured, and his injury leads him to become a heroin addict. So his life is in the gutter when he runs into Charles Daniel Jacobs again. And Charles Daniel Jacobs says, okay, I'm going to perform this on you, and I'm going to help you. And he does the electrical experiment, and Jamie is saved, and he's no longer a heroin addict. Well, he's one of the lucky ones, so because some horrible shit happens to some other people. Yeah. So now, before we get into that, I would love for you to talk about the terrible sermon, because I feel like that is such a standout moment in the book too. So yeah, Danny, why don't you tell us about that?
All right. We've talked a lot about like Flanagan movies, and I know Chris and I, when we did our Blind Manor discussions, we talked about how like each of the characters in Blind Manor had their Emmy moments, their monologues that should hopefully get them Emmy nominations. Well, this has the potential to be a monologue in a movie that gets somebody an Oscar nomination. Yes. Like this is the kind of moment we talked about in Oculus. Karen Gillan has a scene where it's like, I forgot how long it is, but it's just minutes and minutes of her reciting historical information about the Lasser glass. Yeah. And it's this epic monologue that pulls you so into it, the film. And the terrible sermon it's that part of this book, and it probably will be that part of the movie when it comes out. But the terrible sermon is, you hear Jamie talk about it as he's narrating, he's narrating. So it's this like terrible event that he remembers, the terrible sermon. And it's the sermon that Jacobs gives when he first comes back after the death of his wife and son. And, they had been having like guests do the sermons, and he comes back and he basically shreds religion. Like he stands up in a church and delivers a sermon that effectively skewers the church, religion, all of it. And not just Christianity, not just the church, but just all of religion. I wrote down a couple of lines because I just reread this this afternoon. He calls religion a quick buck insurance scam. He talks about how we sell the idea of heaven from the time that a kid is old enough. And he brings up, Tag Along Maury, and he says, I was selling the idea of heaven to my little boy, and that like you also sell the idea of hell. Like don't lie. He says like don't lie about why your shoes are wet, because if you do, you'll go to hell. And that's like, we're selling you this idea so that you'll behave from the time you're a kid. And we're selling you the idea that if you do good things, you'll go to heaven when you die. And he goes on to just, he brings up all of these like cards from the library, and he's looking up and he's like, I was obviously I've had this terrible tragedy happen to me. So I wanted to look at other tragedies. And he goes into detail about these other terrible tragedies, about a tornado rips through a church and kills the whole congregation. There was this one about a father who goes fishing with his two sons. The dog jumps in the water. The two sons jump in after the dog. The father jumps in after the sons. They all drown and the dog swims away. And he kind of laughs about it on the in church. He's laughing about this, like then Jamie is narrating, and he's talking about how people start to like get uncomfortable. They start to walk out. Some people are saying, like, Reverend, get back on track. You're going a little off.
Yeah.
And he just, basically, you have a man who has dedicated his life to the church. He's in his early 20s or mid 20s when we first meet him. So he's a young man. He talks about how he studied religion his entire life. And basically now he realizes that his entire life was a lie, because, he should not have had to deal with this tragedy, and he doesn't understand why it happened. And he ends by, after he calls religion a quick buck insurance scam, he says, you pay your premiums year after year, and when you need the benefits you paid for, you discover the company that took your money does not in fact exist. And at that point, the congregation just walks out on him. They actually insult him, and they insult the memory of his wife. They say that she was drunk while she was driving, and that's why. And it's like, don't question God's will. But it's just such a powerful moment, and it brings up so many of the themes of the book, science versus religion, and again, that's the whole core of who Jacobs is. He's a reverend who has a hobby of electricity and science.
Right.
Now that he's completely lost his faith, he's going to put everything he has into science, and he's going to try to use science to prove that the afterlife exists. And that's basically what his core experiment is. And it all comes back to this sermon.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he shreds that shit, man, like he's a Roku Saki and he's about to take on some turtles, man. He just shreds that religion to pieces, So,
Deep cut shredder.
So, have you guys ever heard of the difference between a planner and a pantser? Do you know what that is? So for writers, a lot of people sum it up into two things, right? You're either a planner, which is that you plan every part of the book, you make an outline, you plan each of your chapters and what's going to happen. Pantser is a person that doesn't know how the book is going to end, and so essentially you're going by the seat of your pants, and you discover what happens based on your writing. Like your writing leads you to what is going to happen, right? And so Stephen King is notorious for being a pantser. Okay,
I would have guessed.
Yeah. And so the reason why I bring that up is because I feel like when you read this book, it goes kind of in circles where you're not really sure where it's supposed to go. And then the scene that you just described, Danny, you were able to connect it to the end of the book. But I feel like we go through so many loops to go from that moment to the end of the book, right? Like we see so much of Jamie's life, and like that moment stands out. It's a key moment of his life, the terrible sermon. But there's like so much shit in between. It's ridiculous. And we see, as he goes through life, he meets Astrid, who we mentioned already before. That's his girlfriend. And there's all these scenes about their love and their sexual like maturity and being together. Like the book focuses on that so much. And the reason why I brought up the Panther and Planner thing is because it seems like King kind of will focus on these things. He's like, oh yeah, this is real interesting. Let me write a lot about this. And then he like jumps and starts talking about something else. So he goes from like teen love to all of a sudden talking about being a rock star because, you know, Jamie finds his brother's guitar and goes on the road. And there's all this stuff about playing music and being in bands. And so we go through all this stuff leading up to this end, which is essentially it's the culmination of Jacobs's work. He's going.
By the way, did you catch the part of the book where he lists all the bands that he's been in? One of them is the Gunslingers, I believe.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, even the Chrome Roses, right? Because like the Chrome in the dark. Yeah. Chris, do you want to kind of explain what this end is that we keep freaking referencing?
Yeah. So basically, just to sum it up very quickly, like what you were saying about King being a Panther, I get it because this is very much it's a road trip story. It's a road movie. It's a road story, if you will. You know, and that's really what I enjoyed a lot about it too, is just the constant, you know, Jamie being on the road, winding up in Colorado. But basically, Jamie winds up in Colorado. He's working for a recording engineer. He's a session musician. His boss turns out knows Charlie Jacobs. They have that in common. They're both experiencing side effects. Eventually, Charles Jacobs becomes not a televangelist, but a huckster, a faith healer, and gets back in touch with Jamie again. And basically now Charles Jacobs is back in the area where they first met, and he's a very rich man, has servants, and he calls Jamie to come back and says, I need your help with something. And basically said, and Jamie's like, no, I don't. I've had these terrible visions, these terrible side effects happen to me. They've happened to other people you've healed as well. And he basically says, your old girlfriend, Astrid, is sick. She has cancer. Come back, help me with her. I'll show you what I can do for her. And then, you know, promise me that, you know, if it works, you will help me complete my final experiment. He goes back, it works, helps Astrid, and basically explains to Jamie that he needs to know more about the afterlife. He has a woman who he is going, and he needs to know more about the afterlife. He needs to know deep down, needs to know what happened to his wife and son. So I believe the woman's name is Mary Foy, who he is going to basically, she's going to die, and he is going to use her to cross over into that afterlife, right?
Yeah.
Shit gets crazy like it does, and you know, like now the character of Mother that was brought up earlier is this. Jamie realizes that what he was seeing in visions, what was being described to him in other people's visions, is now he is staring into it. It is the enslavement of humanity in the afterlife, and these bug creatures basically cracking the whip over us, and this character of Mother, this overseer of all of it. It's very Lovecraftian. You know, that is where this book gets its darkest. Well, at least you think it does.
Yeah.
And basically Charles, you know, collapses in that moment. He you know, it's as usual, as you expect, got more than he bargained for. I believe Jamie kills Mary and severs the cross between dimensions as this Mother, this bug creature, this monster is trying to cross over. So like I said, it gets darker. And that's what you find out earlier is that through Jamie talking to, there's a whole subplot where Jamie is hooking up with his boss's assistant's daughter, and she's trained to be a lawyer, and basically it's like his research assistant on all of Charles Jacobs' healed over the years and what they've experienced. Some people have killed themselves, some people have killed others, these horrible side effects and visions, just like Jamie experiences. So now, you know, you think everything's over, and then you find out that it starts off, I believe, with Astrid, you find out, Jamie's girlfriend. God, this book is so much going on. It's only a 400-page book. There's so much going on, though. You find out that Astrid is now gay, has a partner. The partner helps Jamie and Charles heal Astrid. So you think everything's fine. And then Astrid, who was experimented on, kills her partner. And then everything just starts unfolding. You're getting all these little You're getting new stories, you're getting old stories, things you heard about in the book prior, and it's basically just like, you know, a switch was flipped, and people are killing themselves, they're killing their loved ones, they're doing horrendous things. It's
going to make a great montage at the end of the movie.
It is unbelievable. And you're sitting there, and if you're a King fan, you know King is notorious for, you know, it doesn't always stick the landing. Holy shit, if this is not one of the greatest Stephen King endings of all time.
Yeah.
And a return to bleak and darkness that for Mike Flanagan within the next couple of years that I cannot wait to see.
Chris just mentioned this is only a 400-page book. I actually took a note because I reread this about the last 30 or so pages. Everything that Chris just described starts on page 377 out of 403. So when we say like this comes abruptly at the end, a 400-page book, this is the last 25 pages. So this is.
Wait, let me ask you this. Is it the everyone dying, or is it the weird like Lovecraft stuff too?
Page 377 is when the lightning strikes Mary Faye, the corpse, and that opens the doorway to, I believe he calls it the Null.
The Null, yes, that is what it's called. Yeah.
And so that starts on page 377.
Get the Jesus Christ!
It's crazy because the book's only 403 pages. So
listen, I have 2 pages of notes in front of me that I did not look at once, and I read this book in August, and it is now August 2020. It is now November 2020, and I am shocked just talking about it. How much I still remember. Like, that's how terrific and how effective this book is.
Yeah. Well, that whole sequence. The reason why you guys keep referring to it is just because it's such a left turn. You know, there's horrible stuff that happens, obviously, to the people that were experimented on. There's some guys like eating dirt. This other woman gets into a car accident. At least one person kills himself. That's in the beginning, right? But when they try to open this doorway with this woman and the lightning, it's just like, you're like, holy shit, what the hell is going on? It is like pure Lovecraft with the ant creatures and the idea. And a lot of people have said that this is the scariest thing about the whole book, is that the idea is that when you die, you don't like go to heaven or you're not done. You're like the slave of these creatures. And that's
great old ones. Yeah. The character, if we can call it that, of Mother, this like being that controls this, the Null, the world on the other side, actually talks to Jacobs and says, no death, no light, no rest, just the only the great ones in the Null. And it's just like, so that's it. You die, and then your body dies, and then you immediately become a slave of these ant creatures in this never-ending hellish existence. And there's this amazing description by King of the monster has legs and there are faces on the claws, and he sees sees the faces of his wife and son, and they're like melding together. And that reminded me, I don't know if I know Chris did. I don't know if you saw the Nicolas Cage, the new Color Out of Space.
I did not see that. No, I wish I
did.
But
there's probably the best or craziest scene in that movie, which is based on H.P. Lovecraft also, by Richard Stanley. There's a scene in that movie that has something very similar.
Crazy thing is, after this montage, King makes sure you do not leave this story unless he makes sure that you know that this is all Jamie has to look forward to, that this is all any of us have to look forward to. Enslavement and Mother. That's how you leave this book. It's so like just like
Yeah.
I'm sad it's over, but I'm so happy it's over. You know?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how they could film it. That seems totally unfilmable.
Well,
right
I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It just talking about how like this, the way Chris just described it, and the mist.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about the mist is that was actually not the ending of Stephen King's story.
Oh.
For those of you who have seen the movie, Darabont made the choice and he ran it past King and he was like, what do you think if we do this? And Stephen King went, holy crap, that's bleak. Yeah, do it. And you know, I'm sure we could people know the ending of The Mist by now, but that's the bleakest ending I think I've ever seen in a movie, to the point where it's the only time I was ever in a movie theater where the movie ended and nobody moved. Nobody made a noise. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. Nobody booed. People just sat there like, and it was like, it took like a good 2 minutes into the credits for people to be like, oh shit, we have to go. Like,
for the ending of this book with the montage, you have the love of Jamie's life, Astrid, just and so many scenes where you can feel their love. It reminded me of being a teenager and falling in love for the first time, and she just fucking dies horribly. And not only that, but his brother, who went through this problem when he was a teenager, and then he has a gay lover, and it seems like he's happy in his older years. Nope, he's fucking comatose in a bed, or not comatose, but he's not like able to function basically. So it's just a horrible ending.
Oh, it's just filled with tragedy. The whole book is just filled with tragedy after tragedy. The sister, the initial story about the sister being, violated and murdered by her. It's just like, oh my God! It's just, you need a shower after this book. If you're done with this book, that I see that as a good way to transition into the Mike Flanagan fan casting, Dark Tower, because you guys, you might disagree. But aside from John Glover from Gremlins 2 fame and Smallville, I could oddly see Matthew McConaughey as Charles Jacobs from the carnival on, from the carnival stuff on. Actually, no, screw it. You know what? Interstellar. You can make him look young enough. You can make him look young enough and old enough. I've always thought McConaughey, we had the McConaissance. I feel like that's fading down a little bit. I feel like he's ready to come back and wow us again. And I could definitely see him as Charles Jacobs. Oddly enough, I still have nobody for Jamie. I have no one in mind for Jamie.
So I'm sorry to shred your Matthew McConaughey, right? But the pedophile dad from Gerald's Game, right? What's the actor's name?
Oh, yeah. Henry Thomas.
Henry Thomas, right? He's Flanafam, right? Part of the Flana family or whatever, right? And he could be that innocent, youthful guy in the beginning who loves his wife and kid, and then he could be this menacing guy at the end. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Why not just have Henry Thomas play the young version and then have Timothy Hutton play the older version of Jacobs, like Haunting of Hill House?
I have no doubt that Henry Thomas can pull it off, but I feel like Henry Thomas will wind up. I feel like Henry Thomas will either be Connor or he will be Jamie's boss in Colorado. Okay. I feel like Henry Thomas will wind up being Jamie's boss in Colorado because that's a substantial role in just a section of the story.
Okay, well. Okay, so
here's the question though, and this again with the whole casting issue is Flanagan going to do different actors, which he's done with Hill House? Is he going to do different actors for the obviously you can't. Jamie starts the book as a 6-year-old, so of course there's going to be a young Jamie. But for Jacobs, is he going to start the movie with a younger actor, a guy in his mid-20s, and then have an older actor, a more established actor, play the 50, 60, 70-year-old Jacobs later on? I think that's a really interesting question, because there's a few guys that, like, I kind of thought of Kiefer Sutherland for the older Jacobs.
I like that.
I just love Kiefer Sutherland's voice. I think of him narrating Phone Booth, the movie Phone Booth, and like his, or even the way he talked in Dark City.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, because he has a very hypnotic voice, and I feel like he can pull off the kind of crazy sideshow preacher, faith healer really well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was a guy that came to mind for me.
Yeah. Well, so Danny, I want to address one thing you said, though. I think that it would be smart to keep Jacobs as the same actor throughout, because he pops into the narrator's life. With the narrator, with Jamie's life, we can have different actors play him because he's narrating the story, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is me as a kid, this is me now, right? But with Jacobs, I think just for consistency, if it was the same guy, I think that would probably be the best way.
And with the technology they have now, the de-aging, like, I wouldn't be opposed to McConaughey, but I do love McConaughey, but not as the Man in Black.
Yeah. So okay, how about this?
Do you guys have anybody for Jamie?
So here we go. So, like, what if we just use the parameters of the Flanafam? Is it Flanafam or Flanafamily?
The Flanafam.
Flanafam. Why don't we just use those parameters for this at first, and then we can branch out? But I think, what about Peter Quint? You know, couldn't he be Jamie?
It's going to end up being Oliver Jackson Cohen, isn't it? I think
because he's
the
addict in Hill House, right? And then he could do the
Yeah.
addict.
He is, like, he's probably what, 30, you would assume?
Around there.
Maybe, give or take.
Yeah.
I can see that. If we're sticking within the confines of the Flanafam, then yeah, I could see that. I could see, I don't know, Ewan McGregor looks the same age that he did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And he can pull off a 20-year-old, and he could pull off a 60-year-old or like a 55-year-old with a little, he's almost 55, I think.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm just trying to think of actors who, from the Flana family.
So
how about Rahul Kohli? He can make puns. It'd be great. No.
That'd be tough.
I actually thought of, and maybe this is recency bias because of The Mandalorian, but I thought of Timothy Oliphant as the older version of Jamie. And I the second he took off the Boba Fett mask in Mandalorian episode 1 of this season, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And I love him. I loved him from Santa Clarita Diet. I've pretty much, once I figured out who Josh Duhamel was and who Timothy Oliphant was, and I was able to tell them apart, I realized that I only liked one of them, and it was Timothy Oliphant.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like he has like a youthful look to him, but he's also kind of like a grizzled older guy now. And he can pull off the older Jamie.
Yeah.
I think that would be, he's not in the Flana family though, so I don't know.
Yeah. But they could always branch out. The problem with this story is, besides Astrid, there really isn't a main female lead. And Astrid is mainly, we see her as a teenager, you know. So, like, you couldn't have Flanagan's wife, Kate Siegel, you know, or some of his other female leads play her, really, you know. Because the only time that we really see her as an adult is when she's dying of cancer, you know.
I mean, I'm sure for the role of Bree, you can get Victoria Pedretti in there.
Mm.
You can get Karen Gillan, bring her back. I mean, she might be a little too big now.
Isn't Bree African American?
Oh shit, she is. Yes, she is, because they make a big deal. They make a big deal about how her mother disapproves. I totally forgot about that until you said that.
So she could be what's her face from Bly Manor. I'm so good with names.
Tanaya Miller?
Electricity. You know?
Tanaya Miller?
Tanaya Miller, yeah.
I think Tanaya Miller might be too, I mean, I don't know, because like Bree is supposed to be like 20 years younger than like 50-year-old.
Right. No, who's Miss Jessel?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. That Tahira Sharif.
Yeah.
I think her name was. Yeah. She would be, she actually is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
You should just get a job as a casting director for Revival, Pete. Really,
the key thing is I have to know the people's names. Be like, pedophile dad from Gerald's Game. Yeah. And
hey, you.
Yeah, Invisible Man. You want to be in this movie? You know?
The funny thing is when you're doing for me, when I'm doing like fan casting on the spot like this, which happens never. I don't know why I'm making it sound like a thing that routinely happens, but I found my brain going towards X-Men for some reason. So I'm thinking, I'm like, McAvoy, okay, Fassbender, yes, only because I don't know where the hell Michael Fassbender is. I'd like to see him in more things.
Yes.
But I made a Prestige connection, and now I'm thinking Bale or Jackman.
Oh my God.
Hugh Jackman.
I would take any of those.
Jacobs or for
Jamie. Because I made like a Prestige connection.
Jackman can do anything, and I mean, and if Jamie wants it, actually, I was going to make a joke about if he wants to do a musical number, but Jamie is a musician throughout the whole damn book. So if they want to do like legit singing parts, Hugh Jackman's a Tony Award winning performer.
Yeah,
he could rock out probably a few songs.
Oh man,
I would love to see Jackman in something like this.
Yeah, that's good casting.
Because oddly enough, Prestige is probably I'd say, I know it's a weird pick, but I gravitate to the Prestige a lot. It's probably one of my favorite Christopher Nolan films.
Well, Chris, I think that it's very smart to gravitate towards Prestige, because if you think about it, there's a couple of things, right? You have these two main characters who their lives are intertwined, and that one of them, their loved ones die. His wife dies, right, in the Prestige, and that affects his life, that affects his career, and then they are partners, but then they hate each other, right, over time, and then electricity is involved. There's like electrical experiments that leads to the cloning. So I definitely see some parallels between the Prestige and Revival, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and they both have pretty bleak endings too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like you could kind of tighten the story up to make it fit a movie, the constraints of a movie a lot better. Like you could make Astrid a bigger part of the story to where like she's kind of in and out of Jamie's life, and that like a bigger portion of the story is him trying to help her with her cancer and working with Jacobs. And maybe there's a couple of other experiments with her in particular, and that maybe you could have like Sarah Ferguson, right, from Dr. Sleep. She could play Astrid, right? And that maybe leading up to the end, instead of having this random Mary Foy character be the doorway, maybe they fail to save her life and then she becomes the doorway. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, obviously you got to take liberties with the books. One of the things I just noticed in the last, my wife Athena and Charlotte and I did a video on The Shining book to movie to miniseries, and we rewatched the Mick Garris miniseries from 1997, which, having just read the book The Shining, is really, really good, actually. But one of the things you notice that I noticed watching it was it feels long at points because Stephen King himself wrote the screenplay for it, and you could just tell he wanted to milk a lot of the novel and get a lot of the novel into the book, into the miniseries while he could. And maybe if it was written by a screenwriter, they would have tightened things up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Flanagan's track record with Stephen King work is Gerald's Game and Dr. Sleep.
Yep.
Those are my top two. I think, are those the top two for all of us? Flanagan works. I know there might.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that Gerald's Game is in my top two, but Dr. Sleep is my number one.
Yeah. So like Dr. Sleep is in all of our top level, Gerald's Game was, you know, for the book it was adapting is just amazing. It has two unbelievable performances in there. I mean, the guy's 2 for 2. I've been listening to a lot of the King cast a lot this, summer and autumn, and they talk about directors who've handled King work more than once and who have been successful more than once. And really, there's only 3 guys. It's Darabont, it's Rob Reiner, and it's Mike Flanagan. That's pretty much. And I guess you could throw Mick Garris in there because the Stand miniseries and the Shining miniseries are both pretty good adaptations of the books.
Yes.
And of course, he did Sleepwalkers, which is the best Stephen King movie.
That's a good point.
Right, Chris?
Oh yeah, that was a for those that don't know, Danny's referring to me having watched Sleepwalkers from beginning to end for the first time, and I can't say that I wouldn't do it again. It was bananas, and I had fun. It's definitely worth checking out at least once.
And everyone that's watching this show should watch all of our friggin' Stephen King stuff because obviously we love the man, we love his work. But you guys were very kind in not correcting me when I said that Sarah Ferguson was in Dr. Sleep. It's Rebecca Ferguson, right?
Okay.
So not the Duchess of York. She wasn't in Dr. Sleep, right? It is Rebecca Ferguson. But what I'd like for our fans, for people that are watching, if you guys have made it to this point, like we would love to hear who you would cast in this movie, and if you've read this book, because this fan casting stuff is fun. And if we do a book again, I'd like to do this with you guys again too.
Yeah,
definitely cast revival. Leave your cast picks in the comments below.
Yes, and like and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll send you those fucking ant creatures. All right. So there you go. They're waiting for you in the knoll
with you.
Yes.
You might as well like and subscribe because in the end, you're gonna see Mom too.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I think that's a good point to end on for tonight. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for turning me on to this book. I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would love to discuss a book with you guys in the future too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, so we will see you guys next week as we come back here to discuss our #1 Flanagan film and a big Stephen King film for all of us, Dr. Sleep. See you guys then.